So I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Udo Schneider from TK Insurance Company in Germany today to talk a little bit more about what's going on in Germany and specifically at TK in terms of the continual pursuit of value in the healthcare world. So, Dr. Schneider, can you talk a little bit about your background in TK?
I studied a couple of years ago economics first, and I changed to health economics. And after my studies, I was about 15 years in academia at different positions in university. And yeah, 9 to 10 years ago, I left university and go to TK, to the former scientific institute of TK, which was in 2018, I think, integrated into TK, into the normal departments, I have to say. And what I'm doing now is I'm responsible for coordinating data access from outside. We do health services research, and especially in special funding program in Germany, and we do our own studies using our rich data source, of course.
So there's so much discussion today, I think globally, about pursuing value in healthcare. And sometimes that word is thrown about and it has a lot of meaning, oftentimes not very well explained. Can you tell me how you and the team at TK conceptualize value in healthcare?
For a German sickness fund, it is necessary for payment for remuneration of services that each therapy, each diagnostics in healthcare system has a kind of value for the patient. That's a very global statement, I have to say. For us, our team at TK, we're not looking at the standard benefits catalog, but we are seeking for additional treatment offers which we can make to our patients, to our injuries. And therefore, each of these new treatment options should have an additional value. First, of course, to the patients, and second, of course, it has to have a value in forms of okay, treatment is better and perhaps even cheaper, or it is expensive, but the value gain is more than the additional costs. So there is no clear definition about value-based care in Germany in an insurance context, but everything we do, everything we talk and think about, every project we do, has to word value, of course.
Very good. Was there something that happened? Were there recognized problems in the German system or specifically at TK or maybe with providers that led you as a company to pursue value? What was the background when, as a country or as a sickness fund, that you transitioned to this deliberate pursuit of value?
Two kinds. First of all, there was a legal change. I think it was in the late 1990s, which is called selective contracting, which allowed insurance companies to form selective contracts with providers of healthcare services. For example, an outpatient physician for a specific illness, say heart failure, and we can have a specific program or add on to the standard benefits catalog for selected patients which were enrolled in this contract, and there were additional payments to the provider, of course. And the hope that we have in such a program is that the healthcare service might perform better than the standard care, of course. That's the first aspect. And the second aspect is a kind of funding program in Germany, which was introduced in 2016-17. It's called the Innovation Fund. There are two forms of funding. First of all, the smaller part is on health services research, so more academic view of value-based health, and the larger part is on new treatment options, where new treatment opportunities are there's a concept and they are tested in a regular environment. And which is very interesting regarding pricing is that as long as you've got the funding from the innovation fund, pricing is no problem because the fund pays for everything which is accepted for. And after the funding ends, it's the question, will this new treatment options will be integrated into the standard benefits catalog or not? Or will there be a selective contracting between several insurance companies, for example? And then there comes the question towards the pricing of the new services, of course. So these were the two aspects which we are normally work as a in a legal context.
That sounds very interesting. Can you talk through some specific examples so we can get a better feel for how this works in practice?
Okay, I think I start with the innovation fund, which is more close to what I'm going to do. If we're looking at health services research, we have programs on networking between different physicians who are working together with the same patients and do not know on each other, for example. We have programs on emergency usage of hospital resources that are kind of healthcare research programs, and the new treatment opportunities are, for example, about shared decision making on special programs for younger people in transition, on children with chronic illness, for example. So there will be a special treatment offer for them, and they are free to enroll in such a new treatment offer. And afterwards there will be an evaluation of these treatment programs.
Well, perhaps to get started, let's talk about what I'll term care coordination that you described. So let's imagine a person with a chronic disease, and they have their primary care doctor, and they see multiple specialists. Maybe let's imagine an elder person with some heart disease and some pulmonary problems, maybe COPD. Right, we see those a lot, or maybe endocrinology because there's diabetes. So you've got the primary care, and maybe if you can remind us if a primary care home is required in Germany, or people can refer themselves to a specialist, and then any number of specialists. Very interested in the new innovation program you talked about that helps them all coordinate together. I'm wondering how that works in terms of the coordination and also the payment.
That the coordination was we identified physicians in special areas in Germany and their patients working together, and they formed networks, informal networks, we called them. And we looked at special diseases from the ICD catalog, and then we use these physician information and the disease information to see which patients are enrolled in our sickness fund. We are together with 2 or 3 other sickness funds, of course. And then we took the data and look about the healthcare situation, demand for healthcare. And this information was transferred into a networking for the participating physician. What we discovered was that physicians were not that interested in these programs as we might thought of it, because physicians had very rare spare time, had tough time schedules. They already had their official networks and say we don't need these networks after all. The idea was if we bring doctors together to talk about patients, then it will be good for the patients. There will be an added value. But the results weren't that clear, we have to say.
So it sounds like they felt they were just too busy to
Yes,
add.
sorry.
Yeah. Were you offering to pay them an extra amount? You talked about the special fees that can be added to the fee schedule.
That was very problematic in this project because there were no additional services which were introduced. So it wasn't able to get them a fee only just because for driving to the meetings, of course. That's not that much.
Right. As much as anything, it's probably the extra time. You feel like,
Yes.
I can't do this. I can't do this. If I'm a physician in Germany,
Yes.
how do I make more money? Do I see more patients, perform more procedures?
Yes, more or less that. There's more or less a fee for service component, which together with some fixed budgets. You will get more money when seeing more patients if you extend your office times, for example. And of course, we have the distinction between the statutory health insurance and the private health insurance. And the remuneration for the private health insurance, about 9 to 10% of the population, is higher than the statutory part of the healthcare system. So physicians make more money when treating patients in the private healthcare sector, of course.
Significantly more, or just 10%, or what are we talking?
Oh, it's difficult to say because the remuneration systems are not comparable. So the remuneration system in the private system is a pure fee for service. There is a fee catalog, but the payments in I talk about the outpatient services, of course. In the statutory part is related to a fee based on procedures with a point system, you could say, and each point has a certain value. So, but there is a budget cap at the budget ceiling, you can say. For some procedures, you can only supply them to a patient once to twice in a quarter, for example. But in the private sector, there's no such ceiling.
Is the pricing under the private insurance, is that regulated by the government, or is that freely negotiated?
In the private part, it's not regulated by the government, but it's regulated between the physicians and other partners and companies. So in the private part, there's no regulation from the government. In the statutory part, of course, it's totally regulated by not really the government. It's an institution called Gemeinsamer Bundesausschuss.
It's like a board gathering of those.
It's a scientific board which is responsible for remuneration or whether a service part of the standard benefits catalog or not.
Okay. But regardless, the private insurance is a very small portion of the population, right? You said less than 10%.
Yes, about 10%, mostly working people with high income. There's an income ceiling which we have to overcome, or with people working as civil servants in Germany.
And they get it automatically, or they have the option to buy it?
Morally, they have the options to have the statutory health insurance, but in the private part, which is regular for the civil servants, the government pays more than 50% of the premiums, and the rest you have to pay on your own. If civil servants choose statutory health insurance, normally they have to pay for the whole contribution or premium on their own. There's no subsidy by the government for them, actually. But we talk about changing this. If you're as a normal employer, as I am, if you have the right to choose between private and statutory health insurance, and for private insurance, I get a subsidy by the employer, which is up to the maximum subsidy in the statutory health insurance part. If my private premium is much higher, I have to pay on your own. For the statutory health insurance, the employer takes over 50% of the contribution rates.
Let's spend a little more time talking about some of the different programs that you tried. You mentioned the care coordination and the struggles with that. What about maybe the chronic care? You mentioned there's a program for children with chronic digestive problems. Whether that or another, could you talk a little bit about how you designed that program and how it works?
I have to say, all of these programs I'm talking about, we're doing not on our own. We have a lot of partners from universities, partners from hospitals, from other side providers, partners, other sickness funds, and that's a program which comes from a hospital in Germany, a very specific one. It's Deutsches Kinderschmerzzentrum, German Pain Center for Children. And they are focused on working with children. And they had the idea, could we provide better care with special programs for for children with programs? And of course, can we create indicators for such a group, which we say, okay, do this or do that. And what our part was, we provide for the children taking part in the program, we provide our data. That's the one part of it, and that's what a colleague of mine is doing. Is wants to see whether it is possible, when using our data, to implement a machine learning program, where we find out at an early stage in treatment which treatment is favorable for the children and not. On January, we are providing the data, and we will beginning with the AI model.
That's really interesting. So you and the other participating sickness funds contribute your data.
Yes.
Hospital data center.
Yes, to a data center, and we need an obligation from our legal bureau for that. So you cannot say, "Oh yes, we'll get the data. Stephen, next week data is coming." So we need to declare which kind of data, for what purpose do we need them, what data years do we need, what kind of patients, how many patients do we need the data. Then we need no obligation for that.
And is that requirement like a legal requirement related
Yes.
to price fixing concerns or some anti-competitive competition concerns?
They're not such a legal requirement. What we need is only from a data security perspective, because we have individual personalized data on this and on health data, and data security is a very, very big topic in Germany.
Some countries, they have not only the data security, but also competitive concerns about data sharing. Like in other industries, how you might have concerns about price fixing or collusion between two bodies to fix prices and hurt competition. So that's why I asked what the background was.
That's thoughts we do in TK, of course. Is it worth participating in such a program? What is our add-on value which we gain at TK, or do we have a problem in sharing your data? But in these innovation fund programs, that's only data security reasons that matters.
So the sickness funds share data with the Children's Pain Hospital, special programs they are doing to provide better care for these kids. Can you talk about what reporting comes out of that, or special care programs, and how those connect between the hospital and you, the insurance company?
What they do in this program is to create new indicators on children's health and children's well-being, and they want to cross-check their own experience with treating children with our data. Because what we have in our data, we have data on all kind of treatment sectors, inpatient, outpatient, we have the pharmaceuticals, and so on. And what they see in hospital is only the hospital side of the data. So they want to make sure what's going on outside their own responsibilities. Therefore, they use the data. How can we, just knowing about these new indicators, can we transform them into new treatment options? That would be the next step, which would be afterwards, after finishing the project.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a problem or a challenge in so many countries because
Yes.
the hospital has data within its four walls, but it doesn't know what happens in the rest of the healthcare world for their patients. So,
Yes.
great collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about, and I know it's early, what will that hospital then do for you? Will they report back certain data or have some accountability that they need to report to you?
What we do in this special program, we're the only sickness fund, which is very attractive for us, of course. And we're in a close collaboration, and they will present the results to us, and we can think about how to use results for our own. Maybe to have a selective contracting with this hospital, a special fee structure, a payment structure for TK. Maybe we can use the information about how to inform patients on their illness and give some treatment alternatives. That's what we are looking at.
If it evolves into the selective contracting option, can you talk a little about how that works? What's in it for you, TK, and what's in it for the hospital to enter into this agreement if that happens?
For TK, first of all, we have to be sure that the new treatment option gives an better result in the healthcare process, especially if you are thinking of patients who have had a long history in demand and supply for health care, and we are not satisfied with the results. And therefore, we are going to pay for such a treatment form. In fact, of course, what's the reason behind it? Overall, patients participating in such a selective contracting offer, we hope that they totally have lower healthcare costs than people not participating in such a program. So that's our reason behind it. And for a hospital, for example, it is interesting. They can have better access to patients, offering a standardized treatment package for TK patients, which we're not able to offer in the normal standard benefits catalog.
So it's convenient for them. They like having a group of patients from TK because there's a standardization of process.
For example, yes.
let's say they do a great job and they help you save money, are they able to be paid any kind of bonus or extra fees? Is
Yes.
TK allowed or able to share with the hospital some of that financial benefit that they've helped to produce?
We share it in a way that they get an extra payment. So just hypothetically, the new treatment offer in the participation in the selective contracting, the gain for TK from each patient compared to a control group where is 1,000 euros, say. So the program can cost, say, up to 2,000 euro. If the program is cheaper, it's better for TK. So that's the mechanism behind. One provider, for example, hospital, if you're thinking of outpatient care, we have, of course, a lot of outpatient providers, physicians who take part in such a program. Sometimes in a specific region in Germany, say Bavaria, for example. Heart failure in Bavaria could be the title of such a program. That sort of program doesn't exist, but might be possible. Or is it low back pain, for example? And the idea is then to get a treatment to have less surgery events, which we know of are very expensive and it's very doubtful about the results.
In our hypothetical example, like low back pain in Bavaria, so you could have a special arrangement with a hospital there or a surgery center or physicians
Yes, for
with
example.
the target of having maybe better utilization, right? Not always doing the surgery, but the doctor gets paid fee for service, so they make more money if they do surgery, assuming it's a covered benefit. So maybe, I mean, internally, they want to do the right thing, of course, because they're good medical professionals. And certainly TK wants to do the right thing, but also have a better cost structure for the cost of care. Are you able to make some arrangement with them to get better outcomes and or better costs?
That's a very good question, I have to say. As first of all, as I know, I'm not really sure about it. The contracts are only closed for several months or years, for example. First, just to get an insight whether it works or not. And it depends on which providers you choose for the contracting. In such a case, it would be, say, low back pain and surgery. It would be better to get in a contact like having second opinions whether the surgery is really necessary or not. And the partners would not be the hospitals who do the surgery normally. You're typically right if you're talking with the hospital, then the physician says, okay, there's a controlling of my hospital who says, oh, you have to do 10 more surgeries this week. That doesn't work.
Well, thinking about these kinds of arrangements, you develop a special contract or a plan. Who do you need to have, figuratively speaking, at the negotiating table to make these happen? Are there physicians? You said the finance person, the controller at the hospital, or the people from TK. Who needs to be there when you create one of these arrangements?
First of all, you need the girls and boys have the idea and you have the spirit to help this idea to get real. Both sides, in TK and of course, say at the hospital. Then you have to say negotiate about the treatment and about pricing. And then if there's the pricing, you have the financial department of the hospital. And of course, we have to do the calculations on our own. And then you need to close a contract. And then you have lawyers, of course, from both sides. So the evolution and the contracting on takes quite time consuming. I would say we have some contracts who took more or less more than a year or more than 1.5 years. And from time to time, there is a negotiation talking about services and, of course, of prices. And we have to think about, do we want to offer this contract for each patient in TK or just for a selected group? Of course. Maybe sometimes only for a group who is going to contact TK, says, oh, I have a problem, a lot of back pain the last 5 years, and I went from physician to physician, I don't find help. Then we could say, oh, mate, we have a special program which might be interesting to you.
That helps a lot. That's very interesting. I think just to also get some background on the way the German system works. So you have many sickness funds that people can choose from, right?
Yes, about 100 you can say, and most of them are free to choose. There are some called company insurance funds who are closed only for a certain company. Maybe Mercedes-Benz also has something like that. And there are some who are only located in a special region in a part of the country. So, and TK is throughout Germany available.
On the provider side, do you have hospitals that employ specialists and employ general practitioners, or they buy those practices so they're fully integrated, or are they all more independent? What does that look like?
Coming to the provider side, it's more difficult in Germany. On the one side, we have the inpatient sector, on the other side, you have the outpatient sector, and there's not much transmission between them. There were illegal attempts to get a better combination of them. Let's call it outpatient services at certain hospitals. There are some, how they're called, medizinische Versorgungszentren, medical care centers. Normally, the physician refers you to a hospital, and normally you follow the referral, or you can choose free from another hospital for elective procedures, of course.
Yeah, does
So
the hospital own those medical centers and those clinics?
sometimes nowadays, yes, they're more engaged in such medical centers. For especially private hospital providers do that.
Do they also own primary care clinics or practices?
Not regularly. I heard about several kind of physicians. I think it was dentists and it was ophthalmologists. There are some groups forming who investigate in such practices, and they buy this practice on diverse locations, and they now have a really big network. But normally in the outpatient sector, typically there's one doctor at a practice site.
And that doctor is an independent business person.
Yes.
And I ask because that's different, in all countries. They all have their own ways. And, the US, we have a major trend toward integration where the hospitals are buying other hospitals and becoming so horizontal integration. And then they buy all the clinics, including primary care, and become vertically integrated so they can control those referrals that we talked about to hospitals. Of course, that's their driver, their incentive. When I was in the Netherlands, I learned that their primary care are not allowed legally to belong to a hospital. So they have a different structure arranged, but they employ their specialists. So I always ask about that organization. It definitely impacts your ability or the design of coordination structures.
Yes, in Germany it is possible that some physicians, outpatient physicians, cooperate with hospitals, for example, to have their own surgery capacities within the hospital. So they refer their own patients to the hospital where they are co-sharing with and treat the patients in hospital.
That's very interesting. So the doctor basically, bed number 5, that's your spot.
Yes, attending physician or an office-based doctor with hospital privilege. I found the translation now.
Yeah, we have the same concept in the U.S. for sure. Not necessarily that the way you worded it as a bed, a particular hospital bed or room, is associated with a doctor and that doctor's patients. We don't have that, but that's fascinating. We do have that sometimes on the surgical side, where a physician, not legally necessarily, but in day-to-day practice, is associated with one operating suite. And they may personally feel like they own it. Of course, they don't, but they may feel, well, that's Dr. Schneider's operating room. But that can cause a host of operational problems and inefficiencies. So that's actually a problem in the US. I see a lot of operations people working to change because it's not efficient.
The same is true for Germany. We have a lot of surgery in Germany, sometimes more than in the US per 100,000 inhabitants. Hip and knee replacement. I think we're world champion in Germany on this operations. And since I think more than 20 years, there is a slogan which is called outpatient first, but it doesn't work in Germany.
So why not? I mean, we have certainly seen that trend in the US. Why wouldn't you see that happen? The technology is there.
The technology is there, but there's a clear and distinct separation between out and inpatient, and each doing its own job. And if you're talking about digital healthcare system, most outpatient physicians use a fax system nowadays, which is standard from 20, 30, 40 years ago. So there are a lot of unnecessary diagnoses in the system which were made both in the outpatient and the inpatient sector. That's a really, really big problem in Germany. We have different remuneration systems. We have a kind of fee-for-service point scale in the outpatient sector. We have the diagnosis-related group in the inpatient sector. There was an attempt in the TK 3 years ago. I'm not sure about the results. You talked about the hybrid DRG. The same services, whether provided in the inpatient or outpatient sector, get the same payment to overcome this gap between the two sectors.
And your hospitals were up in arms, angry about that whole idea, right?
As long as they don't lose money, I don't think that they're so angry. It was for several selected services. But the idea is clear. Same service, same payment. It's very easy. So I think that could be a way to overcome this separation between the sectors.
In the US, the payment is almost always lower for that outpatient service. The reason we see such a movement to the outpatient is that usually it's the physicians who start the outpatient surgery centers. So they're basically stealing the hospital might use the word steal, the most profitable procedures and patients away from what would have been a hospital service, bring that to their own center. So it's very profitable for the physicians, even at a somewhat lower price. And then, of course, the technology has enabled that. So I've been knee surgeries as an example, do so many of those outpatient not in a hospital, in a community surgery center that's usually owned. And they make a lot more money. Of course, it hurts the hospitals financially, but it also saves money for whoever is paying the bill, the government or an insurer. Yes. TK.
That was the idea with outpatient surgery in Germany 20 years ago. And at first glance, it worked. There were a lot of more outpatient surgery events, but the number of inpatient surgery events didn't decline. And the second is when introducing the DRG system, as an economist, I think it's a good idea. The days in hospital in Germany declined, which was the main reason for introducing that. But nowadays, a lot of more procedures were undertaken in German hospitals. Surgery, knee, hips, for example. That's kind of economizing, is the word, healthcare, of course.
That's the unintended side effect of DRGs, right? The intended impact is shorten the length of stay, reduce risk to the payer. But if that bed is free more quickly, it will get filled with a different patient.
Yes.
It goes up. We call it heads in beds. The financial model was more heads in beds.
Yes. A built bed is a filled bed. That's what we say in Germany. And there were a lot of beds in Germany, a lot of hospitals. Before COVID, we talked about a hospital shortage. We have more than 2,000 hospitals in Germany, some of them providing excellent services. Some are located more in a rural area, and you're happy not to go there. And talking about, do we need these hospitals? Now, in times with the COVID pandemic, we are happy to have these hospitals, actually, because there are two emergency or intensive care beds, and we need them, actually.
Yeah, definitely. And I think now all around the world, we'll be reevaluating the role of our rural hospitals. In the US, many of them have been closing for financial reasons, but we know we need something there. Now, we also have telehealth technology, so I think they will change. Care will exist in those communities in some way, but it won't be like it used to be. As inpatient things will get triaged to the city, but they'll use those for more screening, triage,
yes,
primary care.
Yes, but I do not have to do a very severe cancer treatment at a rural hospital.
And they don't have the volumes to excel at anything, right? Except maybe primary care.
That's an important topic in Germany, the volumes, the minimum volume, standard volumes we have for several procedures already. I think that's really a good thing.
Right. Yeah. If you need prostate surgery, you want to go to Martini. Then don't they have the highest volumes and the best quality outcomes? You don't want to go to some place that seldom ever does that procedure.
Yes.
Okay. I want to transition a little bit. Let's go back and think about one of the arrangements you choose, whether it's the pediatric pain hospital or something else. Particularly if you can choose something you feel like has gotten some good results, and talk a little about how do you evaluate these, I'll call them experiments, these arrangements. How do you evaluate whether they work and try to learn from them?
Typical example from the new treatment options, because there an evaluation is necessary for the project. Say we have a new treatment options, say it's shared decision making in a specific hospital. Then how can we do evaluation of such a program? We need data. Of course, we have the inpatient data for the patients treated with these new options, and then we need the data from other patients who were not treated in that hospital. And that's what we're doing now. We provide data to the evaluator for the patients treated in that hospital, for the TK patients, of course, for the other, I do not have the data, and we choose control hospitals. And the control hospital has to fulfill several requirements. They have to be of the same size, a university hospital, a big one. They have to be located elsewhere in Germany, so there is no possibility to choose whether to go to the SDM hospital, I call it now, the project hospital, or to go there. So the project hospital was in Kiel, in the northern part of Hamburg. Then we can choose control hospitals, for example, from Cologne or from Munich or Berlin, for example, because there's the probability that I'm living near Hamburg and go to a hospital in Berlin is very, very small. So we do not have a selection program. And for these control hospitals, we look at all patients who were treated at the same time as the treatment group at the SDM hospital. And then we do matching at TK. And after matching, so we have pairs of, say, 4,000 patient pairs. And then we provide them with data from the health provision, say data for a certain time period, say 2 years, what's happened in the outpatient, the inpatient sector, what kind of pharmaceuticals did they get, any aids and assistances they got during this time. And we provide them, of course, with the cost TK paid. So they can say whether patient pathway is the same, and of course, they do some health economic evaluation based on costs. Was the program cost effectiveness?
You have some examples of how that's worked. Let's imagine, for example, if inpatient utilization declined or preventive drug use increased or maybe expensive drug use declined, or cost increases or decreases. Do you have any examples of the results of some of these experiments?
So the normal project lasts 3 to 4 years, and the first of them started in 2017. So we're just at the end. But I have an example from literature. In Germany, there are another group which I don't talk about is the disease management programs. Disease management programs, for example, for diabetes, breast cancer, asthma, or coronary heart diseases, and so on. And there is an example from literature which comes from a different sickness fund in Germany, which evaluated their DMP program for, I think it was diabetes. And they found that there was a change in healthcare provision. The overall costs remained stable, nearly the same. But they found that the outpatient costs, the costs for drugs, increased, whether the costs for hospital events decreased. And then you could say, okay, overall costs were quite the same, or nearly the same, but we see that there are less hospital stays, less adverse events who led to a hospital stay.
I know one of the arguments in the value-based care world is costs don't have to go down. Maybe there would be less inflation than there would be projected to be, but do you get more? So do you have any measurement for quality of care, maybe the results of the disease management, or patient experience, like PROMs or PREMs kinds of measures that are used?
In some approaches, we have such a measure, like PROMs or PREMs, EQ5D measures, for example, the primary data, they're called. And normally you only have them for the treatment group, as long as you do not have a RCT project with randomization of the patients, which is not really typical for these kinds of innovation fund projects. So you have an outside control group normally in this case. But you can use such information. I think it's very helpful because just relying on the healthcare costs is a very narrow view on project and the problem. So we need to, first of all, to have some clinical measures for the treated groups, which you can think of. You have comparable data from a comparable patient group from, say, 2 years ago. We have what about mortality? What about morbidity of the patients? What about rehospitalization, which are typical measures for that? And we can compare them to the treated group in a project, for example, which is, I think, is really necessary. Okay, as an economist, I think cost is a really good argument for doing something or for not doing something. But of course, the other side, the value, how do you measure the value, which is a really crucial question.
Yeah, I think within the US, sometimes some of us give up hope of ever reducing costs. But even if we could get more for the same money, that would be a win for so
Yes,
many.
that's true for us. Of course, if we save money, we could invest this saved money for other treatments for other patients. But if we have the better services for the same money, that's also okay for us.
You've been doing this for a few years, as have, I'm sure, other sickness funds you talk to. What's your advice? There are other organizations out there, be they payers or providers, who are just starting to work on improving value. Maybe they're playing with payment. Maybe they're just doing coordination, different programs. They're thinking about programs like you have done. What's your advice to them? How to do it well? And then maybe what pitfalls or dangers to avoid?
Starting with the pitfalls. Pitfalls, they rest on the legal side. Do I have the obligation to do just a project, for example, selective contracting? For selective contracts, you need the obligation of the supervisor for the sickness funds, and we need the obligation to form such a contract. Inform that. You need to meet the data security requirements. What are the options for the patient? Does he has outside options? If you're just thinking about, I just want to start with a small group, say 200 patients. What about the 201st patient who is asking for the treatment? What do you do now? But, and which is important, most of the sickness funds and other providers and private sickness fund too is related to competition. In Germany, 90% of the benefits catalog is standardized. So you have 10% up, mostly gives you a differentiation to other sickness funds. So I say, TK is really good for if you have low back pain or if you're pregnant, go to TK. And if you more have knee problems, go to another sickness fund. You can change your sickness fund in Germany each, I think, 18 months. Oh, that is cheaper. Let's go there or there, or the services are better. One argument for engaging is obviously is competition, and for the sickness funds, of course, saving money and differentiation through better treatment and add-on values. Use the legal opportunities. You have to decide which programs do I need. The disease management programs very good for large sickness funds. I heard of smaller sickness funds who closed them. That doesn't count for us. There are some programs you have to apply as a sickness fund, the such gatekeeper models, even if you don't like them. But you can use them for new treatment experiences, to use more digital treatment programs, which are not that established in the normal benefits catalog. Now, it comes more and more step by step. But here you can say, okay, in addition to the legal treatment in hospital, we have a telemedical program for heart failure, for example, which we think is a good idea to monitor things, not for a really complex treatment, but for monitoring, for giving advice for the doctors. And if we believe that digital treatment is the future, then we should engage in such programs, of course. And TK is in favor of such digital programs because we say, okay, we're such a large sickness fund, more than 10 million patients. We can use the advantages of digitalization from using our data, from using digital initiatives for our such a large group of patients, which can be treated or diagnosed. It's not at their point of residence, but at a doctor in Berlin, Munich, or something, or in Washington. That's not possible in the German system, but of course that would do, of course. And we are looking for new ideas in treatment. We have a web page where people can present their ideas to us. It's not freely available. We have to send them the link and so describe your idea. And if we're interested, we're going to talk to them. And sometimes, not always, sometimes we have a new good idea and sometimes we can form a contract with them. But often, of course, not. There are a lot more ideas than we could do, and a lot more ideas are not really in favor of a sickness fund, but they're more point at the hospital. They want to only have the money, and we do not see add-on value for patients, of course, and for sickness fund. It only has an add-on value for hospitals. So that's not what we are engaging in.
Okay. Well, Dr. Udo Schneider, thank you so much for the time. This was so instructive for all of us to learn more about how the German system works and specifically what you're doing at TK in your relationships with all kinds of providers and thinking about the impacts on patients and how to get us more value in healthcare. So we sincerely appreciate that, and we'll be back in touch with you later. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.